Yo, check out my website, www.theclowntimes.net. That's clown spelled with K, as you see here. As you see, here are my rants here. I'll be more and more regular in posting rants in the future. You see what I have going on here. Also, you can also get your merch here at www.cafepress.com. Search for the Clown Time Sports. You see here I have sweatshirts, hoodies, baby gear, mugs, t-shirts. So just come on over and grab yourself some merch. Welcome to tonight's um, college football realignment podcast of the Klown Out Podcast. I'm Scott First. Please see the like, comment, share, and subscribe. Even if you do not agree with anything what we have to say tonight, myself and my guests, and you probably won't. You probably won't, depending on what side of the fence you follow on. But just comment anyway, because either way, we'll have some fun with it, and you'll be glad you did, and I'll be glad you did. So I have over 700 subscribers, so I'm still pushing that amount to over 1,000. So please continue to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And thank you all for your support in advance. All right. I mentioned college football realignment, conference realignment. If you're familiar with the podcast, you know who these guys are. We're going to talk some ACC realignment rumors. I'll just get to it. So you guys know them from All Sports Discussion, ACC Sports Blog. They have a podcast as well, so please check them out. That's Jeffrey Fan to my left and Matthew Warren below me. So, gentlemen, welcome to the podcast again. How y'all doing?
Thank you for inviting us tonight.
Yeah, hey,
sir.
Scott.
Yep,
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So, with all this that went down, right? And I did a live about this last week, okay? It amazes me how many people are not thinking quickly when it comes to this magnificent seven that's going on, right? That wants to test the grant of rights. And I guess their whole deal is, I think people believe in that. And it may be the case that I think it's a simple majority in ACC if they want to dissolve the grant of rights. Again, I do not know. But, Brett McMurphy, formerly of ESPN, I forget where he's with right now, what outlet he's still right now. He basically said, he gave the name of the seven schools: Florida State, Clemson, NC State, Carolina, Miami, Virginia Tech, the moniker, the Magnificent Seven. So we'll get into it later, but basically it's like people are just, going, like, citing the demise of the ACC when they do not know the facts that first of all, if you're going to break the contract is to be broken, or if there were any loopholes in this grant of rights, don't you think it would have been broken by now? I mean, we've been in there for 7 years, right? Like we got 10 more years to go. So, I mean, no, 13. I'm sorry, 13 more years to go on this. So you would think the lawyers from these institutions, all of them, would have found something by now if it was any loopholes, right? But nevertheless, and also, it's this: if you try to get anything in business, it's this certain thing called leverage. And I do not think, outside of maybe a couple of the schools, we'll get to that in a moment, who may have a soft landing spot waiting for them, what leverage does the other five have? So anyway, Jeff, I'll start with you, man. It's like, is there a way that can we make sense of all these stupid ass rumors? Like, just lay out the facts, because you're closer to this than I am, about why this whole idea of the conference being dissolved and the grant of rights being resolved like next week or tomorrow, as some people are saying. How ridiculous that whole notion is.
Yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. There's no question about it. I mean, Twitter just goes into complete hysterics. Every time, the slightest announcement happens. And we were talking before your show started about what happened with the Big Ten today. And, all these Twitter experts, nobody said anything about, their deal not being finished, and this angst, going on with their deal, and where were all these experts? So I mean, if you couldn't even, you know, you weren't even aware of what was going on with the Big Ten, and you claim all these insights into what's going on with the ACC and the grant of rights. I mean, you don't. It's one thing. There are a few things that I feel certain about, and one, I mean, I think there's no question that these schools and several schools, probably every single ACC school, has looked at the grant of rights.
Of course.
There's no question about that.
Right.
And like you said, no one has yet been able to find this magical loophole. I mean, the document itself was made by lawyers, smart lawyers, and you can't say, oh, the Big 12 or the Back 12 when they had their sign, oh, it's stable now, and suddenly the ACC's has a grant of right that it's going to be broken next year. I mean, it's nonsense. Really, at the end of the day. Now, on our show, when Matthew and I've talked, and we even said it yesterday, we've pretty much maintained that at least for the next 5 years, no one is leaving the ACC. I mean, I could potentially see someone towards the end of the decade, really, really taking a hard look at it. But I don't think the SEC really wants to expand right now. The Big Ten is trying to clean up their contract. They're not going to expand right now. I mean, they're as rich as they are. They're infighting right now about their own schedules and integrating UCLA and USC and the NBC part of their deal. I mean, they're talking about them losing anywhere from $5 to $10 million if they don't give in to NBC's demand. They're not going to expand right now.
Thank you very much, Kevin Warren.
Yeah, wow. He got the keys to the Rolls Royce from Jim Delaney and still managed to run it into a tree a little bit.
Right.
I mean, Jim Delaney was an absolute visionary, but man, Kevin Warren, yeah, I think if Kevin Warren were the commissioner of the Pac-12 or Big 12 or ACC, they would already be carving up the conferences. I mean, let's be honest, he really didn't do a very good job. He just had a Rolls Royce handed to him, and still, kind of got it dented up there, here and there. But I mean, it's not that they're not going to be fine. The Big Ten's going to sign an enormous deal and everything. But it is interesting that, they were spewing out $1 billion deal, and now they're having to, potentially pay back as much as like $70 million. The NBC part of it's not clear. But and what happened last week? We'll get back to the ACC.
Sure.
We know those schools were looking. That's not a question. But some of the other stuff that I think was completely absurd. The conference was not going to get dissolved last week. Those 7 schools, it's been reported, most of them went into this and don't even have a landing spot. I think they were just kind of, and this is fair, I think most of them were just looking at that grant of rights at the off chance an invite comes one day that they're prepared, to respond. But the conference is not dissolving anytime soon. The Big 12 is not an option. That's not a first option. I don't know how that got started, but if any ACC school I was looking at was using the Big 12 as an option and said, hey, we're going to dissolve this conference, and look, I would be absolutely irate about it.
Yeah, let me say something. About. I'm sorry, Jeff. Let me say this because when you mentioned the Big 12, remember those Twitter heads I'm talking about? There's some YouTubers from Big 12 country who feel themselves because they're still happy about the fact that they managed to land a decent contract, not a great, but a decent contract, and they still forget that they don't have Oklahoma and Texas going forward, and they have UC. Not that UC is terrible. I live in Cincinnati, but the likes of Central Florida and Houston and BYU, that none of them or Texas nor Oklahoma. They tend to forget about that. But they have this notion, a lot of them have this notion that, ooh, we can get Florida State and Clemson and the NC State and Virginia Tech to come to our league. Why? Why would, first of all, yeah, why? If you break it down, even when the Big 12 renegotiates before the ACC gets to renegotiate their deal when the media deal expires, the Big 12 is still going to be distant, but it'll be a distant, no more than distant third behind the Big 10 and the SEC. So why would these schools, Florida State, Clemson, again, this is about thinking critically, why would Florida State, Clemson, NC State, Virginia Tech, or whoever leave a stable company, leave the ACC where they're already in the 3 in terms of earnings, go to a conference that not only would be no better than a distant third, they don't even have a damn linear channel. You know, that's like what I tell people. That's like my wife leaving me for me.
Yeah,
I mean, that's like, what are we doing?
It's a great analogy because you can't say, oh, they're stable because they have a grant of rights, and then at the same time say, well, the ACCs can be broken because if that were the case, as soon as the Big Ten or SEC gets a notion that they want to, take one of their teams, they will. I mean, I have nothing against the Big 12. Honestly, I prefer to see, all 5 conferences survive, but there's no mistaking that the Big 10 or the Big 12 has been the most unstable conference in the last 15 years. They've lost 6 teams, 6 programs have left in the last 15 years. You can't wish yourself stable, just because of, public relations. And I'll admit, they really recovered nicely after losing Oklahoma and Texas. I mean, I thought them getting Houston, Cincinnati, BYU, and UCF was a good move. But like you said, it's not a. I don't think ever in the history of realignment that a team has made a lateral move, and it would be at best a lateral. Lateral move.
Better than a lateral move. No better than a lateral move. And plus, their new deal. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it was like average. They would average out to $31 million once Oklahoma and Texas gets going out to the SEC. So that's still less than what the ACC is getting right now. And what is a long bad contract. They're still not getting more than the ACC with that. So again, that's why folks need to think critically.
Yeah, I mean, with this. The difference between the Big 12 and the ACC, maybe one or the other is like 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 million ahead, but anything less than like 10 million is like splitting hairs. It's not much. And like you said, even with their deal, and they just put out the numbers for this year, and the Big 12 and the ACC were, they were within like 2 or 3 million of each other. And that was even without the ACC network's full numbers not being in, because it didn't start until the end of 2021, and those recent numbers they put out were 21, 22. So the ACC is going to get a little bit more of a bump, but they're still really close together. And the bottom line is it would be a lateral move. So I mean, I think at the end of the day, we all agree that schools have been looking at the grant of rights. But it's really got blown out of proportion that the conference is breaking apart in like the next 5 years.
Yeah. Matthew, let's get you in on this, man, because I know you've been on the sideline. But it's just crazy, man.
Let me just add something here on that, because I think sometimes you have schools, and Jeff knows I like to talk about this, but sometimes you have schools that they have this group of 7, they're getting together to talk because this is more of a public relations ploy to ESPN to like, hey, give us a bone. You need to give us a little more of a bone to give us more money. So the difference in revenue between the 2 conferences isn't staggering, and then it doesn't completely destroy the product that you have on TV. And I think that's the first thing. And as I continue talking about public relations, I certainly wish that Jim Phillips could do a little more in the on the public relations standpoint regarding yes, we're working on something, but nobody really knows what the hell we're working on here to
Right.
try and increase revenue for the conference. So I think that's certainly part of it.
Right, right, and exactly. So, and you know, I have to give a shout out to my sponsors because I'm going to go in on this because I've been sitting on this for a long time. Like I said, I did a live last week, and I'm still baffled at at the dumbassery, if you will, as to what you're hearing out there in this Twitter space in this about the demise of the conference. But before I get to that, let me get a shout out to my sponsor, BetUs.com, right quick. So, listen up, sports bettors. Your favorite sports book, BetUs.com, is back for another year of NFL action with the biggest industries sign-up bonus up to 200%. BetUS offers our members the opportunity to cash in on all your favorite sports, including NFL, UFC, and MLB. If you're looking for live in-game betting, incredible odds of daily odds, boosters, props, and parlays, they have them. And how about Fast Pass, exceptional one-on-one customer service? They have that too. So log to betus.com or call 800-792-3887. That's 800-79-BET-US. You use the TKT code for the Klown Times as well. BetUS.com, where the game begins. All right, fellas, let's get back to it. All right, we already laid out why the notion of the Big 12 is ridiculous. Let's just go on to the other aspects of it right quick. So a lot of people are saying, well, the Big Ten, the SEC, if Florida State, Miami, Carolina, Virginia, NC State, Clemson can go to SEC, they're making a huge conference, blah, blah, blah. Okay, for those of folks out there who think that a lot of these schools going to SEC, let's just work out some numbers right quick. Again, thinking critically. ESPN already has the SEC. First of all, they own the rights for both, full rights for both the ACC and the SEC, right? So SEC, they're paying more because of the brand names, and they won a bunch of national championships. We all agree with that. So if you're ESPN, you're hemorrhaging money, you're laying people off left and right. If you're ESPN, if you could get to keep Florida State, Clemson, Carolina, Duke in your portfolio for pennies on the dollar that you're paying for Alabama, Georgia, Florida, and LSU, and so on, why in the hell, Jeff, would ESPN willingly pay more by moving Florida State and those brands to the SEC and paying more for them, whereas they can still keep Florida State and all those brand names in the ACC at a discounted price? Because keep in mind, when John Swofford, former commissioner of the ACC, signed that deal with ESPN in order to get the ACC network going, for a couple of things. A, ESPN had them over barrel because the ACC had been winning a lot of national championships. They're only just a handful, right? But also, they were able to get them at a rate that's a sweet deal for ESPN. It's a sweet deal for them. And they're making a whole lot of money off of it because it's a sweet deal. They're making a lot of money off of the ACC network, believe it or not, for those of you who do not know. Just check the numbers. Google them sometime. But ESPN, they're in business for a reason. They're not going to willingly we work a contract with a conference a great conference they've been paying at a discount. Why would if you're paying for something for a discount, why would you willingly pay more for it? Doesn't make any sense, Jeff.
No, you're absolutely 100% right, Scott. That there is absolutely no way that ESPN is going to orchestrate the breakup of the ACC to give more teams to the SEC and to split them off into Fox. It's one of the dumbest things that I have read. It makes zero sense, and I'm so glad you mentioned the network, because the base media deal, yeah, absolutely, it's a mess for the ACC, but the network is a home run. I mean, it is it's making for ACC schools somewhere in the neighborhood of $7, $8, $9 million. It's a 50-50 split with ESPN. So the math is pretty simple. Take about 8 million, times it by 15, because Notre Dame gets a full share.
That's correct.
That's how much the ACC schools are making. ESPN's getting over the other half. It's making over $100 million a year on the ACC network. I mean, they bundle it with all the other ESPN channels. You know, if you start moving teams around, not only do you have to pay them, like you said, and add value to your contract. So whoever moves from the ACC is going to have to actually make more than, you know, these 90, $100 million deal for the SEC. You're going to have to account for another $100 million, because once the ACC breaks up, you know, all those negotiations you made on carriage fees or whatever for the network, they're going away. And probably the network is not going to likely stay together for a dissolved ACC. So
Right.
I mean, just none of it makes any sense. It's like you said, you know, just kind of put your thinking cap on a little bit and ask yourself, is ESPN going to be behind this? No, they're not. You know, the wild card is, you know, what Fox and the Big Ten could do. I mean, no one's naive to say that they may not do anything, but I feel really certain that you don't have ESPN working the behind the scenes to break up something that they're that invested in, that's making that much money. I consider it far more likely that they at some point will look at the contract, and they're not going to match the Big Ten and SEC. That's not going to happen either. But I mean, who knows what kind of negotiation could occur that could add, you know, another 5 or 10 million to the deal, and then you don't catch the Big Ten and SEC. But even like the AD at Florida State said, you get into that competitive area again. You start kind of incrementally, you know, getting it into a manageable deficit. I consider that more likely than ESPN, you know, doing any kind of work to break up the ACC.
Yeah. Matt, well, I'll let you get into this as well, because I know you want to.
But yeah, let me just add something. Let me just add something onto what Jeff said. I'm kind of going where he was going, but you know, using more of a, you know, kind of the math mode thing here. There comes a point in, what is it? They call it diminishing returns, right?
Right.
At ESPN, right, where you have a situation. I'm just going to throw this out there. Let's say 3 years in a row, Alabama or Georgia, whoever it is, Alabama or Georgia wins the national title 3 years in a row.
Sure.
It becomes like the UConn thing here for women's basketball, right? Remember when they won all those titles in a row, and all of a sudden, people got bored with women's basketball and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And where this point of diminishing returns comes from with ACC, where you with ESPN, where you see, you know, a certain conference just racking up all these titles in women's and becomes so dominating that it takes eyeballs off the TV sets,
right?
That sort of thing. And I mean, I agree with you both. I don't think that there's a scenario here where you know, ESPN wants to destroy the ACC, but certainly if you start seeing that sort of thing happening in terms of, you know, what's happening on the football field and impacting eyeballs on the TV sets, and you know, and that sort of thing, and you know, for people finding that there's a less competitive product out there, that's when you start seeing, you know, whether ESPN will want to try and relook at that deal. And I think, you know, and the disparities in revenues certainly puts players at different campuses, right? That, you know, and that's sort of where the Florida State gentleman that Jeff was talking about earlier, the AD there, that's kind of the I could say the area code where people are going, because those are some of the after effects.
Yeah. And one last thing before we move on, I'll start with you, Matthew, with this whole notion of like merit-based revenues, right? Essentially is at least the uneven revenue sharing, which is, they call it merit-based, but it's really uneven revenue sharing about, you know, like if they make the playoff or whatever, whoever makes the college football playoff, with the bowl games, whatever. It was bandied about by Florida State's AD, which is ironic because if they started that the last couple of years, this would be getting the merit-based stuff. Wake Forest, Pitt, because Pitt actually won the ACC and played in the New Year's Six Bowl. Clemson, of course, because Clemson's been winning national. They've been competitive. They've won a few national titles along the way. But that's it. Basically, you're looking at Clemson, Wake Forest, and Pitt getting this merit-based stuff because why? They've been winning out of the division or the conference. So, and it's funny to see that Miami is in on it. When the hell was the last time Miami won anything that's worth for them? Hell, they won the division only once. In the 20 years they've been in the ACC, they've won the division only once. They've won more than 10 games or more once. So here's the bottom line, fellas. If they really want to fix this, all they have to do is just win. Just win. Just be like Al Davis and just win, baby. Just win. Because John Swofford when he brought in Miami years ago, among the other schools, Virginia Tech and Boston College, he envisioned Florida State and Miami going at it, similar to the way Alabama and Georgia is going at it right now for the SEC. That's the reason why he put them in different divisions, so they can face off every year. And that's why they originally had the ACC title game in Florida, to accommodate that for both Florida State and Miami. He had that in mind when he brought Miami into the conference. And of course, it hasn't happened yet. So anyway, Matthew, how ridiculous is this merit-based uneven revenue sharing? Because history shows that it doesn't work. They tried in the Big 12 just to placate Oklahoma, Texas A&M. All three of them have left or already on the way out, right? And they've tried it in the Pac-12 with SC and UCLA. They're on the way out. So how ridiculous is notion about uneven revenue sharing when it comes to merit-based metrics?
I mean, it may or may not happen. Jeff probably has better insight on this than I do. It may or may not happen. I think part of this, definitely is a conversation with some schools to, say, hey, can you increase your expenditures on football so we can be a little more, so you can be a little more, you can be a little more competitive on the national scale and raise the profile of the conference. That's probably an after effect of something like that. But I mean, those conversations will take place. I agree with you, everything that you said about how historically it hasn't worked. In fact, now I haven't had a chance to take a look at this, but our friend AJ Black, he does for Sports Illustrated BC, did a podcast on this, on why it wouldn't work for the conference. And I honestly haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, but both Jeff and I need to listen to it because he had a long hour podcast in there. So I'm trying to give him a small plug here because all of us,
sure,
I think, need to listen. All of us need to listen to it.
Yeah.
But historically, yeah, I think it could happen. And I would be interested in hearing what Jeff's take is on it, but I don't think it will happen. I don't think it will happen in the near future.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think cooler heads will prevail and table that because that's just ridiculous. That's just so ridiculous. Yeah. So Jeff, like I said before, man, you said it before too. I know Matthew said it before, and other ACC fans said it before, and give another plug to Locked On ACC podcast on YouTube. They've said it before. Kitten Gibbs and company, they said it before too. They fixed this whole thing by holding the end of the bar. Win. Florida State, you have one job. You're the brand. Win. Miami, especially Miami, if you're good, the rest of the conference will be great. Clemson needs some company at the top. Clemson can't do this all by itself. NC State, Carolina, Virginia Tech, especially, I'm looking at y'all too. The people who part of this Magnificent Seven, they've been disappointed. Outside of Clemson, they've been disappointed. This whole thing, Jeff, would be rectified whenever the next contract comes around. Or remember, there are some look-ins in this contract. They have look-ins that both the network and the ACC will take a look at and decide upon revenues or whatever. Just the bottom line is, just like Al Davis said, what's good, just win, Jeff. That's all I have to do.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say a word about what you guys were talking about with the unequal revenue distribution. And I mean, I totally agree that it's not a solution. And I don't think anyone really thinks it's a solution, but I do think that it is going to happen because the Florida States and the Clemson, they've made it really clear that they want it, and I think they've managed to make enough noise that the ACC will get it. Now, with that said, if I'm a Boston College or I'm a Wake Forest, yeah, I might vote for it, but we're raising that exit fee. I know we're not going to get more years on the grant of rights, but we're taking that 120 million dollar exit fee, and I'm making it 150, because if one of those schools does leave, I'm going to get paid. So that if I'm one of those schools, that's the way I'm looking at it. But as you said about the winning part, I mean, people they kind of forget, and here's that critical thinking you brought up. When the ACC was negotiating the contracts back in like 2010, 11, whatever, and John Stauffer took so much criticism looking back on it. And don't get me wrong, he deserved some of it. He definitely was not, the visionary that Jim Delaney was or Greg Sankey was in the SEC.
Right.
But at least one of the things in fairness is you're trying to negotiate versus those two conferences back then. And I think you all remember the BCS record that the ACC had.
It was
I mean, they had no teams. It was like something like 2-14 or something just miserable. They had no teams playing for a national championship, winning national championships for something like over a decade. And how do you go into a negotiation and ask for more money when the football product was so bad?
Right.
And you mentioned the Miami, and they tried to get that game in Florida to have these great matchups, and the idea was right, and it just didn't work out. I mean, there are other things that Swofford could have done, and we could talk forever on it. But I mean, the stuff about staying with Raycom, and there was a chance to start the ACC network back in 2008. I mean, how much would that have helped to have that revenue since then? And the ACC presidents voted against it, and at the same time, he didn't try to convince them to do it. He voted on, while Delaney really pushed that for the Big Ten. So I mean, he's not getting a pass, because he definitely made mistakes. But what if ACC football starts doing really well? I mean, that's how the network was able to get started in 2019, because Florida State and Clemson and some other schools, they were starting to put together some really good seasons. 2016, I think the ACC went something like 10-4 against the ACC, and that right there was allowed the network to get started, and then it just kind of fell off a cliff after 2016. So I mean, if the ACC has 2 or 3 years of some sustained success, that contract, you can go in there and at least have the argument and say, hey, we're producing top 15 teams, top 20 teams. Our ratings for basketball, I mean, just look at our football. Just look at last year. It after a really awful couple of years, I mean, there were some signs of like good football in the ACC. Not great, don't get me wrong, not great, but I mean, Clemson and Syracuse, I remember this, was the highest rated college football game of that week. Clemson and Syracuse, when it was a top 15 matchup. So people will watch it if the teams, if it's quality football.
Yeah. Yeah. It's again, just win. Just win. That's all I have to do is just win. So Matthew, Jeff, where can they find you in social media and your blog?
This is Matthew here. You can follow us. The site Twitter account is at AllSportsDACC. That's at AllSportsDACC. You can follow me on Twitter at ASD_Hokey Smash. And then you can go to our site at allsportsdiscussion.com. And that's where we do a lot of blogging. And I'm going to have a lot more to say after June 9th on the blog.
I'm looking forward to it.
After June 9th on the blog. And Jeff, I'm sure we'll talk about he's going to talk about his Twitter account and where you can find our podcast.
All right, Jeff.
Yeah, you can find us blogging on the ACC at allsportsdiscussion.com. You can find me on Twitter at Talking ACC Sports. One thing that I think we all can be like 1000% certain of is that the conference and everything is going to be the same going into this season. So yeah, now it's time to start previewing those, get those previews in, optimism everywhere, and let's see how the season goes.
Amen.
Jeff, where's our podcast at? Which sites?
You can find it on Podbean, but if you go to the All Sports Discussion, we post it there every week, and you can just listen to our previews of each ACC team that Matthew schedules there. So that's the easiest place to find it, is right there on the blog site.
It's also on Apple, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's on Apple, Stitcher. Let's see. I think what else? What other services are out there? There's like 3 or 4 of them, but for sure, Apple and Stitcher you can find it on.
Nice. And I'll be tuning in. Everybody, please check these guys out. They do great work, especially if it's the ACC. Check them out as well. So that's all I have for tonight. I'll try and do better next time. But until next week or whenever I get back on here, y'all take care, be safe, and enjoy this southerly nice weather in May. Have a good night.
All right. Thanks, Scott.
Take care. Thanks.
Thank you. Peace out.